Hello, Austin. I'd like to thank you for allowing me at your homes once again for this second edition of the second season of Esoteric Science Roundtable. And I would like to thank my special, very special guest. Let me emphasize, special, very special guest, Jeff Contreras, for coming on as a guest to discuss magic. And so if we could kind of get into a little bit of an intro to discuss, first of all, Jeff, if I can bug you and ask you to start, how did you become interested in magic to start?
Hey, I tell you, it all started when I was a little kid. I'd always want to manipulate matter and people, basically. I mean, I'm not going to lie, you know what I mean? Most people come into magic or start studying magic because they want power. And it's usually not power over themselves, it's power over others. And that's basically what drew me to it. I mean, as a kid growing up, you know, I'd watch the TV shows, Bewitched, all kinds of other stuff like that. And you see things happening and you're like going, well, I mean, all these stories, they have to be based on something. I mean, there should be at least some kernel of truth or fact about this. And I wanted to find out what that was all about.
And so as a young person, I guess you started getting into maybe reading, or what led you into it more so and more seriously?
Well, actually, I tell you what, the thing that really made me understand what magic was all about was church. I grew up and raised a Catholic. I've had all my sacraments except for marriage and death. And the Catholic Mass in itself is just one giant magic ritual.
True.
And growing up, I went through my rebellious stage, and I even turned away from God for a long time, and I embraced philosophy. You know, of course, on my other show, Therefore I Am, I say it's the philosophical show with the political edge.
Right.
And in school, all I did was take philosophy classes. I wanted to get a degree in philosophy until I realized the professors weren't teaching me the philosophy that I wanted to know. And the ancient philosophers, I mean, there's a huge history of philosophy before Jesus' time, and even more so after Jesus' time, and there's a thread that continues through all ages.
Very much
and
so.
This thread even exists today, and I wanted to pick up that thread and study it and see what was going on. What is all this talk about?
Right.
Why is it that people get so freaked out when you talk about magic or spells, and why is it that heavy metal is bad and Aleister Crowley is an evil person, and that means Jimmy Page is evil, and I couldn't comprehend that.
Right, I understand.
And you know, through philosophy I discovered the Kabbalah, which is basically Jewish mysticism.
Right.
It's been carried over through the centuries, and it's more not so kosher now. It's more, I guess, occultish or Rosicrucian, whatever you want to call it. It's different now. But at the time, the Kabbalah was how they used to teach people to become prophets. In the Bible, there's a long line of prophets that came before Jesus, and these people, they weren't just born that way. They went to school and they learned how to receive messages from God or angels or any other type of discarnate entities. And those methods still exist today. They've been changed slightly just because of, you know, the way society changes, but at the heart, it's all ritual, and that's why the Catholic Church is just one huge ritual, the whole Catholic Mass, and it's the same thing.
Right. And so at some point in time, you were able to validate for yourself that this was something valid and real and it can be applicable in your own life.
Oh, definitely. I mean, folks, just because you don't study magic or you don't understand it, there is a huge world out there, and there are a lot of people who do study these topics. They might not call it magic. They might call it, golly, what's that one? NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. That's been really big here for the past couple of decades, you know, or the power of positive thinking.
Right, that's a big one.
That in itself is the basics of what magic truly is.
Right, I would agree. And just to fill in and give you a little bit of a slant on how I got involved, I also was raised Catholic, and so I found through the ritual Mass, you know, you go through this ritual every Sunday morning, and this whole process, there's power that's set up through the repetition, through the magnetism of this process as it's done over and over again over the centuries. It builds up an amount of power, and this ritual actually does have some effect. And so when I was very, very young, I would always pray when I was very young for patience, wisdom, and understanding from about age 7 on up. And I was kind of like a little Christian mystic. I was reading the Bible, wondering, why is God always beating up on the Jews? Why do people say, you need to fear God? I love God. Why do you have to fear God? I didn't understand any of that. And so I found my way through all that, searching. And then finally, about 10 years ago, I started getting into more of the esoteric science or occult science and finding certain books and reading those and getting a fuller understanding, and then getting into comparative religion and seeing, as you said, there's a common thread that runs from ages past and through all antiquity, and you can follow that thread and you can see how many of the great men that we prop up through history that have done great things. You look back in history and you say, Leonardo da Vinci or Galileo or any of the many of these individuals had some link or some tie to this body of knowledge. They may not have been affiliated with an official organization, like an occult organization, as there were many that did exist, although they were largely underground. But you can follow the thread into modern day, and it is very relevant and valid today. And that in the hustle and bustle of our modern society, people might say, how does that have a place? How is it valid now? Science is our master, our God, our indicator of what is and what is not. And religion and spirituality has really taken a back seat in some respects, but it has made its way back, and it does still have much validity. So I would like to go ahead and get into a bit about what is magic. What do you feel is magic? I know you touched about it a little bit, but...
Well, I tell you what, there's a huge misconception about what magic is. I mean, even for me, when I didn't understand what truly magic was, like I said earlier, I thought it was about getting power, I thought it was about getting chicks, I thought it was about getting money, and these are all things that I wanted. I mean, to a certain degree, I still want them a little bit now, but I've started to understand what really is important. And the more and more I started to learn about magic, true magic, the more I began to realize that true magic is just learning about God and trying to become as God-like as possible. Now, don't misconstrue that and think that I'm trying to say, replace God with yourself. Because that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying try to be like God. And that's not something that you might be able to get right off the bat. It's something you have to think about. And the whole esoteric realm, it's not anything that you can just pick up a book, read a book, and immediately understand. It's something that you have to mull over, you have to contemplate, and then after a certain amount of time has passed, you come to an understanding, a realization, or a true knowledge or gnosis of what actually is going on. And then you start to leave things behind, like my lust for power over others. That's hardly there anymore. I mean, every now and then I can see it coming out, and I manipulate my friends a little bit, but I try not to do it in such an evil way as if I would have like 10 years ago.
I gotcha. Well, I would say also another aspect about what magic is, in my estimation, is an exercise of the will, and you did discuss that. Basically, it's just exercising and inserting your will and imposing your will. Now, true, you can impose your will on others and you can manipulate others, but mostly if you use your will to create constructively and create in harmony with divine law, that is very much magic, and that is my reason for trying to approach this body of knowledge and trying to make practical use of it, is that I realize this is a valid science, and I realize that it could be used to, again, move matter by an exercise of the will, but for constructive purposes, and that I could actually help improve the lives of other people by improving my own life. And that is the key thing, too, to keep in mind. People can have a hobby as far as reading this type of stuff, and they can be somewhat interested in it, mildly interested in it. Maybe they read a few books, see a couple of television shows, what have you. But there is a definite chasm between a hobby and just a little passing fancy and an actual lifestyle choice to follow and make this a part of oneself, a part of one's everyday routine from waking to going to sleep. And even during the sleeping hours, it doesn't stop. It becomes ingrained in you, and it becomes a part of you, and it becomes something that you just at a certain point, you're not going to be able to, well, you can get past, you can possibly get past it, but there is a strong point where you realize the validity of it, and you realize that it has to be a lifestyle. It has to be something that you adhere to on a daily basis. You can't just be into esoteric science one day, out of the week, and consider yourself an occultist, or whatever term you choose to use, a practitioner of magic. You have to make it a lifestyle, and that is very key and very important to consider as well.
I want to hit on something that you said there about the will. Look, I'm not a Thelemite. I'm not an OTO person. I have read a lot of Crowley's stuff because Crowley used to be a part of the Golden Dawn organization I respect highly. And the OTO usually gets a horrible rap because of their motto. And their motto basically is, do with thy will is the whole of the law.
Right.
And a lot of people seem to think, well, God, that's very selfish. I mean, apparently they're promoting, just do whatever you want to do, and that will elevate you to godhood. But that phrase is always taken out of context. What is meant by that phrase is, do these exercises, study this, follow this path, and work towards a certain goal. And once you achieve a certain level, your will is no longer your will. Once you reach a certain state of consciousness, God starts working through you. And the will that you are doing is God's will. And that is truly what is meant by the phrase, do what thy wilt shall be the whole of the law.
True, and I think from the gospel narratives, we have the best example of how that takes place, in my estimation, and that is how Jesus, through Christ, was able to, through this occult process, to make his will one with the will of the Father. And that is my endeavor as well, through this practice, is to unite my will and to bring the will of the Father through me, and to try to do what I perceive to be God's will, and to try to, again, have some kind of creative expression and try to be helpful towards others as much as possible. And so I think that's a very valid point. Now, I would like to touch also on a specific saying from the New Testament, from the book of Matthew, that talks about a very key element, a key aspect that is a building block and a basis for magic, and that is the practice of meditation. All magic practices meditation at some level. And meditation, also known as yoga, from the root word yug, meaning union, if I could just read briefly, come to me, all of you who are tired from carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke and put it on you and learn from me, because I am gentle and humble in spirit, and you will find rest, for the yoke I will give you is easy, and the load I will put on you is light. And so right there, if you can get past the outer meanings of that, and if you want to take it literally, that means we need to wear our yoke around our neck and be attached to God by a yoke, I guess, I don't know. But what it means symbolically is to take that union of the physical vessel with the divine, to again, make your will one with the will of the divine, and to have a union. And again, that's the basis of meditation. And so by virtue of that, in my estimation, Jesus was very much an occultist, and probably the best known occultist as a result of this kind of things that were attributed to him in the gospel narratives.
It's very interesting that you bring up how yoga has as its root yug, which is union. And a lot of people don't seem to realize that religion is a Latin word. Legare is the root of religion, and legare means to bind. Religion is to bind again. So a religion is something that should help you reconnect with God. Magic evolved from a lot of Egyptian schools, a lot of schools in the Middle East, and at the time it was called theurgy. And theurgy literally means God working. It was one of the first sciences, and they actually developed rituals and practices that would help you get closer to God. And that's what this is all about.
Keeping in mind definitely that it is very much a science, and that there is much, you can use a scientific method on it, and it's tried and true. Again, if you follow throughout history, the great names in history, again, like a Galileo or what have you, you could see that they were able to use these methods And there's a long chain throughout history that you can follow and see how, again, tried and true this practice has been, tried and tested, and proved to be a valid science, very much so. And I can't think of a better word to describe it than a science. Now, there are different interpretations of magic, and the two main delineations would be an Eastern approach versus a Western approach. And they both have their different methods of attaining the same thing, but with a slightly different symbolism, slightly different way of thinking, but ultimately it's the same body of knowledge, it's just a different approach towards looking at it. I myself am a little bit more prone to the Eastern way, and so I follow certain writers and certain things that bring out that particular teaching and emphasize the Eastern way, which is based more so on the old Hindu religious records and basically had it start more so in India. Whereas there's a Western tradition that, again, as Jeff stated, started more so in the Middle East and Egypt, and you more so are a little bit more interested in the Western approach.
Hey, and I tell you, the way I got there was through the East, actually. You know, like I said earlier, when I was going through my phase of rejecting God and rejecting, the Catholic Church, and really all of Christianity, it was because it was leaving me wanting. I wanted something more. I wanted something active. I just didn't want to go to church and have the priest do everything, and then that would be all. Sure, you can partake in communion, but that was not enough for me. And so I started studying Hinduism, I started studying Zen Buddhism, and I really had an affinity for the Tao. And I thought, this is incredible. This is what Western churches need. And then I discovered that the West has always had this. It just is not publicized, and that is the Kabbalah. The Kabbalah is very much like the Eastern schools, except that because they use the Eastern methods of basically transferring information by word of mouth. They didn't really write anything down.
That's true
for the
most
longest time.
schools.
The Kabbalah, the Zohar, which is the main body of text that the Kabbalah supposedly stems from, was never written down until the 13th century. Yet, it predates the time of Christ because a lot of the prayers in the New Testament are purely based on Kabbalah.
That's
and
true.
if you can spend a little time learning a little bit of Hebrew, not the whole language, but just a little bit, and you read from the Hebrew Bibles, and there's a lot of them out there. Even the New Testament comes in Hebrew, folks. Just because the Jews rejected Jesus does not mean that you can't find the New Testament in Hebrew. You got to remember, Jesus supposedly was a Jew. And so he took that body of knowledge with him into Christianity, but the Roman Church left it out, or really they just didn't want the public to have that. And they have their own schools of mysticism. I know the Jesuits, they get a horrible rap these days because they become very political. But when that group first started out, it was all spiritual and spiritual based, and they learned from the Kabbalah, and that's where they got their information from, and they still use that system today.
Also, from the Roman Catholicism, the cult of the Sacred Heart also ties into that same mentality as far as the inner workings, the inner understanding of how religion works and how magic truly works. And again, the thread that you find going through from the earliest days forward, that it still has its validity. And I would also like to touch upon the concept of black versus white magic. Now, many people, when they think of magic, they're just going to think of it all as being black magic, all of it as being anti-God, all of it as being demonic, satanic, and that nothing good can come out of it by somebody trying to practice these things and try to, again, move matter, exercise one's will. They have a difficult time understanding how there can be good magic and bad magic. But are there any absolutes in nature? No, there aren't. There's always a balance. There's always a yin to a yang. There's always day to night. There's always a balance. And so that was also part of my understanding pretty early on too, was that there have to be good people working in this science too. This is a valid science I was able to prove to myself, and I had to also come to the realization that there have to be good people. You know, this can't be an all bad thing, as many people try to paint it and portray it, that it's all, anything that, you know, tries to use these methods is just purely evil and purely black magic. I really can't buy into that, and I've been able to demonstrate to myself otherwise.
Hey, and for me, it all boils down to this. Black magic, white magic. Black magic would be ego-centered, selfish magic. Anything that you do for the betterment of, and not really the betterment of yourself, but just to make you feel good. That, to me, is black magic. White magic is working towards the betterment of yourself in order to affect the benefit of society.
Very much so. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. Definitely. That anytime that you are strictly selfish in your mentality and you want to impose your will strictly for your own gain and own benefit, that would be tantamount to black magic. And also, I'd like to talk a bit about the different levels as far as how we can exercise magic. There's a so-called astral plane, which is the plane of emotion and desire, and there's a plane above that, which is the plane of mind, the mental plane. White magic works on the plane of mind and works from that center, whereas black magic is only able to work on the astral levels, only able to work with the closest to the material state, which is the astral or the desire plane. And so by virtue of that, black magicians have apparently and seemingly much more power on the physical plane than do the white magicians. But in actuality, the white magician is able to tap into a much higher, much more spiritual state in order to draw his energy, to draw force from that energy pool, from the mental planes. And so by virtue of that, one white magician can pretty much take care of a whole room full of black magicians by virtue of where they're drawing their power from. They're able to draw power from a much higher, much more spiritual source, and so they're able to really do much more concentrated work, although seemingly and apparently it seems as though the black magicians have won the day on the physical plane. But that is part of the illusion. That is part of a great illusion that is part of this whole illusion as to what magic is, what it's not, why is it bad in some people's estimation. There's been a lot of wrangling and moving and manipulating behind the scenes to keep it out of the general public in a lot of ways. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit as well, too. When you hear about things in the media, mostly like New Agey stuff and different things like that, you always see it painted in a certain way, which is to make it very silly, very frilly, you know, crystal-y, all this kind of goofy stuff, and which that has validity anyway. But I mean, the way it's portrayed is to make it out to be very silly and very fluffy and just silliness and nothing really valid. And that is very much by design to keep people disinterested in it and to keep people away from the real truth that these methods do work and we can move matter with the mind. And it's again a valid science. And this is the very same method, the ultimate thing, when you really realize it and you study behind the scenes and you get into the political wranglings and movements behind the scenes, you come to realize that those that wish to enslave us, those at the highest levels, make use of this very magic that I'm describing. And if it's good enough for them to use and it's something that they consider real and valid and they're able to make use out of it, you know, why is that? Why do they make it so silly for the mainstream and they paint it a certain way and portray it a certain way? It's because they're trying to keep us from the actual real truth of the validity of the science.
And I can give you one very good reason why this is happening. It's because when you study magic or you really get down into a true type of spirituality, whatever you want to call it, that liberates you. That is where true freedom is. That is what they don't want.
Right.
That working with magic, working a true, valid spiritual path is so liberating. You actually become a true individual. And that is what the powers that be don't want. Think about it. They want us to be like the Borg, where the orders come from the queen bee and they get passed along to all the drones and we just follow along going, yes, 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 football, football, beer, going out to the clubs, all that other crap. But when you start to realize that there's something more, that, you know, when you start to feel the presence of God, you want that more and more. And when you start going in that direction, that in itself gives you true freedom.
True, exactly. And that's a valid point. That is indeed the most That's the biggest reason why it's kept from us, because that will allow individuals to gain freedom, to gain power, and to be able to come together collectively more so and more so. If there were a lot of people that felt the way that Jeff and I do, which there are, but if they could come together and pool their energies more so, then those that are in power right now, well, they realize right now what's going on, and they are shaking in their shoes. I can promise you, they go to bed at night fearful. I mean, I see the leaders of the world, they give a speech in public, and they're just waiting with bated breath to see, is there going to be applause or are there going to be boos? I'm serious. They are so scared. They're teetering right now, between, they don't know where they're going to go, and they're just so cautious. They're really trying to ratchet up this whole workings and try to enslave us, real quick, because they realize people are waking up to the game, and they realize, people are understanding what's going on, and so they are very fearful that there are going to be there's going to be a mass rejection of the scam that's been perpetrated upon us all this time, and that people will begin to recapture their own individual power and work together for the benefit of others, as opposed to getting in that me selfishness, which is, again, black magic, whether you choose to call it that or not. If you're a strictly selfish person and all you do, every energy and every effort that you have in your life is towards you yourself and none other, and you think never of another person, you're a black magician. There's no other way to put it. Whether you realize that or not, you are, and that's something that has to be recognized and dealt with. And it is being dealt with more so because these things are coming out in the public more so, and that's part of, again, why is magic important now? I'd like to get into that a little bit too. Man is more specialized now in this day and age than he was long times ago. We have evolved physically, mentally, emotionally. All these things, our capacity is much greater. Each individual has much capacity these days. And so that is why this science is extremely valid right now, because man can make use of this with his more specialized state. Also, cyclic times and seasons. The magic tradition had to go underground as Christianity gained popularity, and that was right and good and proper for the time. And so the true magic tradition had to go underground, even though it was taken into the great religions of the world at some level. The true occult teachings had to go underground so that mainstream religions could rule the day, and then the cycles would turn, and then the magician would be able to have, again, more of a free reign and be able to, again, constructively work out in the open more so. And we're seeing a resurgence, and we're seeing more of this knowledge and information come into public scrutiny and public understanding, more so and more so.
And for me, the reason why I think magic is so important and so valid in this day and age is because everything else, all the other types of religions, have been so watered down that if you ever want to reach a state of enlightenment, forget it. It's not gonna happen. You can go to church 3 times a day, every day, for the rest of your life. And if you just sit there and listen to the person talk to you, forget it. You're not going anywhere. You might as well be watching the television. It's not going to get you anything. But magic, or true spirituality, is active. It's participatory. You have to work at it. And that's really why you don't see it around so much, is because there are so few people willing to give that dedication. It's like you were talking about earlier with all the armchair magicians, or the dabblers that we like to call them. They might sit around, they might collect books that are thousands of years old, hundreds of years old, and they might read these books and study them, but if they never put that knowledge into practice, then they are just like the persons where I said, go to church 3 times a day for the rest of your life. You're not going to get anywhere. You have to take an active part in your life, because no one else is going to do it for you. No one. And until you do that, you don't even exist.
That's true. It is very much an active, participatory thing. It's a difficult word for us to get out today. But, religion, for some people, religion is the ritual that they've gained through, like, watching football on Sunday and that whole process, and going to the game and maybe painting up your face. Alex Jones talks about this quite a bit, and rah, rah, rah at the game. That has replaced the magic ritual.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of these things, have just been washed down, watered down, and we have been substituted something that's just so meaningless in order to replace something that is very valid and real.
definitely.
So that's unfortunate in my estimation. Also, another thing too I'd like to get into as far as magic today. Magic today, again, is a constantly evolving system, and it has to meet the needs of evolving man. If it doesn't meet the needs, it's obsolete, just like all these other things we've talked about. It has to stay current and stay valid with the evolutions and movings and shakings of culture and man's endeavor. Now, psychology is a key point, and you had a very astute caller call your show last week that asked you about the book Prometheus Rising by Robert Anton Wilson.
Right.
There's also another author, Morris Berman, who wrote a book called Coming to Our Senses that also brings out a lot of these points, that psychology is esoteric science or occult science. You're studying the inner hidden aspects of man. What makes a man what he is? What makes him tick? What makes him think a certain way? What makes him feel a certain way? Psychology is truly an occult practice, an occult study, and you see that as part and parcel of the resurgence of magic coming into the mainstream. It's just called another thing, and it's just propped up as a valid science, when in actuality it's based on all of the old philosophy teachings, all of the old mystery teachings, and all of the different ways to discern and to man know thyself. The key thing you hear over and over again. Jeff hammers the point home all the time. I hammer the point home all the time. Why is it that we emphasize that so much? Man know thyself, because that is the keystone, that is the cornerstone that's going to get you to understand. When you can look at yourself in relation to the larger picture and not just look introspectively at me, and everything is tunnel vision, me. When you get to look at yourself as part of a larger whole, then you can make real progress, and this spirituality that we've discussed will be a valid, actual livingness inside oneself. It is a livingness. It's not a death. It's not a distraction or anything like that. It's a real, living, focused attention that, again, is used for constructive ends, in our estimation, as far as what we're trying to do. But then again, like as we spoke of, there are those that prostitute this great power for their own selfish ends, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, in a perfect world, folks, or at least in my perfect world, healthy people would be the ones to go to psychologists. And not only that, psychologists would be the priest of the society. And people would go to them, healthy people now, and the psychologist would say, okay, well, let's jump into your mind today and let's learn more about you to help you understand yourself. And understanding of yourself, that brings with it an understanding of God. I mean, all of the magical rituals, along with meditation. Meditation is the building block. And then you do other types of contemplative meditations through symbols. And these symbols help you dive into your own mind. There's a very significant event in the life of almost all magicians, and that is the knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel. This holy guardian angel, which every person has, is the supreme psychologist. It's when you can start to communicate with your higher self. That is what psychology is all about. I think it's unfortunate that people today, you know, they'll only go to the psychologist if people tell them, well, you need a psychologist, or if they're feeling really bad. You know, it's always when they're down and when they're on their downswing of life that they decide, okay, well, maybe I do need to see a psychologist. But really, in an ideal world, like I said, you would visit them on your upswings and they would help you get closer to yourself and therefore get closer to God.
Right. Unfortunately, like you said, people, you know, they feel like, you know, they're drowning or something like that, and they have to reach out and get some assistance from somebody, be it a psychologist or maybe a priest or what have you. And, you know, those institutions are there for a reason, and they're there to help people. But again, if you can help yourself, that's the best thing to do. And not everybody has that capacity. And people will go through many, many lives not being able to help themselves. They will be victims to the tide, and they'll just be like flotsam and jetsam, just tossed about upon the water. You know what I mean? And they won't have any control over their lives. Circumstances will just happen, and they'll think that this randomness is just going on, and that, oh, woe is me, you know, God's out to get me, or the devil's out to get me, or whatever, and, you know, please somebody rescue me. The whole key to regaining your power is to understand that you have to start and do it yourself. You can't expect others to help you with your own problems. I mean, you can get assistance, you can get guidance, you can get advice, but it really, unless you apply it to yourself and make it a practice in your own life, whatever advice you may receive from somebody, it has to start with you. You have to apply practically what you've gained, whether it be through reading a book or talking to someone or whatever. You have to bring it into your life as a valid science and an actual practice for there to be any kind of sign of improvement whatsoever. Otherwise, you're just going to be wading in the water and trying to keep your head above from drowning.
Yeah, for those of you that have watched my show, I make no secret about this. My show is for me. It's because it's 100 times cheaper than going to a psychologist. It totally is. And I can talk to myself through the camera. I can see myself on the monitor there. And this is all about getting to know me. Yes, I'm a guest on your show tonight. But, you know, as much as I like to think I might be doing it for you, you know, because you asked me to, and I think you're a cool guy, or I might be doing it, you know, for you out there in television land, just to bring, you know, a sliver of information to you that you might not have had before. But it's not like that at all. It's all about me. It's about learning more of myself. And when I'm talking about this, that's what helps me understand it. It's like you said, putting things into practice. You can't just read a book and then go, oh, that was a good book, and then put it on your shelf and forget about it. You have to take that knowledge and do something with it.
You have to internalize it and, again, make it an actual practice. Agreed, very much so. And my motive and my underlying reason for bringing Jeff on was to kind of clarify that our past few weeks' shows, Jeff and myself, we've kind of had to get on the defensive a bit and kind of explain our point. You know, how is it that we talk about all this patriot type stuff and we talk about all this these awareness issues that all these other shows seem to be talking about, but yet we're throwing in all this occult information, and how does that tie in? And, you know, are you with them or are you with them? You know, who are you? What is your motive for, you know, why are you getting on TV talking about these things?
I can't tell you how many times, you know, in the past 6 years now, because this is my 6th year on Access, that people will come up to me and say, you know, Jeff, I really like some of the stuff that you talk about, but when you start talking about magic and spirituality and all that, that just kind of weirds me out, because all the other information that I'm reading that's in the same vein as patriotism or something like that indicates that what you're talking about is the devil and you are being misled, and I'm worried about you, Jeff. And you know, that in itself is that same trap that we were talking about earlier, that watering down, that pushing you away from yourself and from God. That it gets put into every aspect of life, and the patriot world is no different. But the reason that I do this is, once again, because what we talked about earlier. I am in love with freedom. And this has given me more freedom than anything else has. And don't think for a moment, folks, that anyone else can give you freedom, because they can't. They can only take things from you. They might say, oh, look, here's freedom, here it is, I'm holding it right in front of you, and all you have to do is do what I say, and you'll get freedom.
Conditional freedom.
Yeah, exactly. It's always conditional. There's no such thing as true freedom from an outside source. It has to come from within.
Right. And, you know, I would like to thank all you folks out there that have been praying for Jeff's immortal soul, because he strayed from the way. Thank you very much. But nonetheless, I would
I could use all the prayers.
Right, you know, and you know, quite frankly, I always, after my show, I always feel a lot of energy, a lot of warmth, because I feel that I have been received from the public, and I feel that that exchange of energy takes place. That is magic as well. That exchange of energy between us sitting here and you folks at home viewing is a magical exchange, whether you want to look at it that way or not. And so it's a very valid exchange, and it can be used for the benefit of all of us. We can all partake of this good vibe. And that is part and parcel too. If you really practice this stuff and you really start making it an actual factual practice in your life, you're going to find that you are going to magnetically draw to you certain people that are going to either help you, hinder you, whatever, but they're going to help you along your way towards wading through and figuring out what's what. And so there's a lot of magnetic response that sets themselves up. Now, I didn't know you 7 years ago, however many long years ago, 10 years ago when I started getting into these things. I was living in California. We had no communication. And, you know, your show gradually started drifting from more purely political to more philosophical, gradually. And it's like, not like I called you up and said, hey, Jeff, you got to think about doing a little bit of this and a little bit of that, you know, make your show a little bit more mystical, you know. And it's not like we compared notes. I mean, we did discuss, when I was going through the process of taking the classes to have my own show, I went to one of the philosophical meetings and talked to you a little bit and said, hey, well, that's why I need to get my own show, because, you know, maybe we don't agree on everything. And that's also another point to bring up too. Jeff and I don't agree on every single point about these things, but there is much common ground, and I'd rather see all of us down here at Access concentrate and emphasize the common ground, which is there, and that is freedom. I cannot emphasize that enough. It's freedom. We all want it. We all love it. We all need it. If you don't desire freedom, then I will pray for you this evening because it's something very valid. I mean, if you just don't have a fire inside yourself for freedom, to be free and to see others as free individuals and not being imposed upon, then, you know, that's unfortunate. There has to be that fire in you, that the same fire that was in the Patriots, that was in the original founding fathers of this great nation. That fire was inside them. The fire to be free was in them to such a degree that they couldn't hold it back. And a new nation was born as a result of that fire for freedom.
Oh, but wait a second. Those founding fathers, they were Masons, weren't they? They must have been the devil.
Well, that's possible, but also you could look at it this way too. They were able to understand and intuit that this power, God, can be directed and channeled, again, through an exercise of the will, and that getting into these practices can emphasize and accentuate and can help you to accomplish certain ends. Now, certainly, you know, there are people that are from the Patriot movement that, you know, they don't like to show the pictures of George Washington with a Masonic apron on. They don't like to delve into that aspect of it because they want to just talk about the Illuminati. Certainly, there were illuminated Masons, and those individuals had more of a political agenda. There's no question about that. Jeff and I talk about that many times on our individual shows, and so do other shows talk about that. But that doesn't mean that everybody wholesale bought into this illuminated concept. There were very many, there have been and there continue to be many, many esoteric organizations. Now, why are there so many different organizations? Because they're all looking at a little perspective, a little piece of the pie, and they're all trying to do their little part. I mean, that's just part of nature.
And actually, if I could add a little bit to that, personally, I feel that the reason that there are so many secret societies that are out there is because what happens is when you get a society or a group of people that have discovered the way, a true path to spirituality, well, by their very nature, they want to share that with others. And so they start a group or perhaps a mystery school. But what happens is because there are other elements out there that do not want us to have freedom, well, it's very easy for them to send in a few students into the mystery school, and then in a few years to send in a few more. And then after about 10 or 15 years, those students that they have sent in to infiltrate a good thing rise to levels of power, and then they start to change things. And then they turn it over to a more selfish bent, or even worse, they start watering it down, and they deviate from the one true path that, you know, that the originators of that school or tradition had, and it becomes basically nothing, a fluffy, new agey thing that, like you were talking about earlier.
Right.
But then some other people will come along, they might join that mystery school, and then they'll say, you know, they'll realize what's going on. They'll say, you know, you people at the top, you're not what I thought you were. But I know there's something here, and they'll break away, start their own school, which will be back on track. You know, like in Hinduism, there's a thing. It happens like every couple of hundred years. You know, let's get back to the Vedas. You know, we have deviated too much from the Vedas. It's all this mumbo jumbo. Too many sermons. Too many people trying to tell you what these religious texts saying without you studying them and learning them from yourself. And over the centuries, you know, it gets to be where you have several mystery schools on one side, several on the other, the left-hand path and the right-hand path. And the only difference between them is that one actually promotes freedom and the other promotes selfishness.
Very good point. That's a very solid point to make. But that, again, is part and parcel, I think, of the resurgence of the mystery tradition, that it's becoming more and more valid in our day and age, and that there's a joining of the way, if you will, that the body of knowledge is being agreed upon by many people, even though they may have a different interpretation slightly, and there's much fracturing going on between these different organizations, and there has been throughout time. You know, personalities get involved, and people move away from the personality, and they want to start their own organization because they feel that there's validity in the core of what is being taught. And so that carries itself on. It's part of the perpetuation as well. The fracturing is also part and parcel of the carrying out and the spreading, the proliferation of this body of knowledge as well. It's all part and parcel and right and good and proper in its own way as well. And so we see, again, this resurgence of these types of ideas. And I'd like to talk about one thing as well that's being much demonized, although these books are extremely, extremely popular among the youth and the adults. That's the Harry Potter series.
Oh, without a doubt.
You see that, here's the little kid going to wizard school, and ooh, that's got to be evil, right? He's going to wizard school. But, I've always, as a young kid, thought that that would be cool. And before there was Harry Potter, I always kind of, fantasized about those types of things, wizard school or what have you, and being able to, again, exercise in some creative way, to be able to manipulate matter in some creative way. And so we see infiltrating the mainstream these concepts coming back again, underlying the mainstream consciousness of magic, schools of wizardry, and bringing it from the realm of fantasy back into factual existence. And there are still many organizations right now that you could prop up as equivalent to the Harry Potter schools that do similar things, and they're right in the midst of where you might least expect them, that these organizations exist, and they're carrying out this sort of work very much in plain sight. They're hidden in plain sight. And that's another thing too. People can go along unaware of a lot of this stuff for a long time, and it just seems to be hidden in plain sight. But once you make that specific move towards trying to really bring this information into your life, then you're going to start to see, and all of it will be opened up to you, and you're going to start to see, oh, there are all these organizations out there I had no idea about that are all tied together to this whole idea of the path and returning to divinity. And there's just a lot of different organizations that are still around, that are still trying to recover and replenish and bring that information back again.
And one thing I want to mention here, just because you don't believe in magic, or you don't think that the spiritual path is a path for you, doesn't mean that you're not affected by it. Magic, and in particular symbology, is affecting you all the time. These mega corporations and their corporate logos are symbols. And you might look at the symbol and you might think, oh, I hate McDonald's. Look at there's golden arches. I hate them. I would never eat at McDonald's. But every time you're passing by those golden arches, the arches are bypassing your conscious mind and jumping right into your subconscious. And the meaning of that symbol is being brought to life whether you accept it or reject it. And it's better if you understand what's going on. That way, if some type of evil, for lack of a better term, or negative energy starts to manifest in your life, you will know where it came from and how to handle it.
That's true. And if you really want to look at these heads of these corporations and these individuals that have used these logos, who are they and what are they involved in? If you really, really get into it and study it, you will start to find that there are those individuals at the highest levels of these individual great multinational corporations that are practicing this very, very science that we're talking about, but more in the selfish vein in most instances, that they are the true black magicians, and that those that wear a suit during the day are the same individuals that wear a robe and have a dagger and are standing over a newborn baby ready to eviscerate and devour. And that is part of their ritual, and that's part of their lifestyle, and that's also part of the illusion. These people, that you prop up as, great individuals, what have you, the movers and shakers that we see in the mainstream, a lot of these individuals, in their own time are doing a lot of things that people have no clue of, and if they did know, they would likely deny it because they just could not fathom, they could not consciously accept that, oh, that individual is involved with that? No, it can't be. And they will just shut down, and they can't accept it. And that's part of this too. That's part of the illusion, part of the fear of the unknown that we see factor in, that people are very scared a lot of times, and without knowing really what is their fear based on? Why are you afraid of this body of knowledge? Just because you've been told it's bad all this time, without really delving into it yourself and testing the waters with your own feet and seeing for yourself, what is it all about? That is how I came to a fuller understanding and decided that I wanted to make this a practice in my life, and I saw the validity of it, I saw the positive results, and I would assume you as well
Oh,
did.
Definitely. And without a doubt, and it's not just that the positive results that I see around me all the time, it's the stuff that I've researched and I've seen through history. I was like, oh, look at this great man. Well, what made him great? He
Right.
wasn't just born a great man. Nobody is born a great person. You have to become a great person.
That's true.
And these great people that I respect throughout history, they've obviously done something. They've had some type of training. And you can find out what it is if you just apply yourself.
True, true, true. Very true.
You know, when the student is ready, the master will come.
That's a very, very famous saying if you study occultism, and that is a very true saying as well. That you will find those people that will be able to help you out and give you the indicator. They're not going to impose on your free will, but they will give you a hint, an indication of where your next move needs to be. And that may be that you go into a bookstore and you just glance at a certain book, and all of a sudden that book is just what you've been wondering about, and it's valid for what you need at that time. You'll find these synchronicities and circumstances setting themselves up more so and more so. We'd like to go ahead and grab a couple of calls here in the waning minutes of the show and just get some public feedback.
Before you take that call, though, I wanted to hit on something that you just said about synchronicities. Folks, there's no such thing as a coincidence. No such thing as a coincidence. It's all a synchronicity. And the only reason you think it's a coincidence is because you cannot grasp it, or you don't have the perspective to see what's actually going on.
Right, there's no such thing as luck or randomness. There is purpose behind all moves at all levels. So let's go ahead and grab call number 1. No, sorry, go ahead, you want to grab it, sorry. Line 1, you're on the air, go ahead.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good, yourself?
Cool. I just want to say that tonight's topic is really cool. You've covered like a lot of ground. And I just wanted to say, it's not Kabbalah, it's Kabbalah. That's how you pronounce it. And
See, that's that kind of nitpicky stuff we're talking about.
Oh, let me ask you a question. Are you Jewish?
No, but my friend wanted to convert, and so he read lots and lots of Jewish stuff.
Okay. Well, what is it then? Is it tomato or is it tomato?
Yeah, it really doesn't matter.
That's cool. No, that's...
You mentioned about the Latin word ligare.
Uh-huh.
What were you saying about that?
Ligare means to bind.
Actually, it's to appoint.
To point?
To appoint.
To appoint?
An office, or like give sort of like power to.
I'll check my Latin dictionary when I get home, but I'm pretty sure it's to bind.
Okay. I took Latin for quite a few semesters too. And also, one more thing. I was wondering if you knew something about the divine paradox.
There are many paradoxes in
Or what do you
occultism.
think about, okay, well, I guess I'm pretty vague on that one.
Kind of, sort of. But hey, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it.
All right, well, y'all have a good one.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks for your time. Take care. Have a nice evening.
Bye-bye.
Okay, line 2 on the air. Oops. Line 2.
Good evening, Joe.
Hi, how are you?
You hear me fine?
Yeah.
You were speaking of magic. I was wondering, with telekinesis, that word, would that strike you as being pure magic?
You know, for me, that is a side effect of spirituality. You know, levitation, telekinesis, any type of mental activity, that's not something that you strive for. You're striving for to reach forward to God. And along the way, these things just sort of happen.
Well, there's many paths to God,
True.
Definitely.
and some are more beaten than others.
Exactly. And some of them are shorter than the others.
But well, in the spirit world, I don't think there's distance in that way necessarily.
Perhaps not, but we're not, we don't live in the spirit world, we live in the material
And
world.
that's the point that I was trying to get to, was that your conscious mind, which is more into the physical side of things, and your subconscious, which is connected more so to the spiritual, I would say, in order to project said energy, a certain energy there's a trick, I would think, where you have to kind of put your conscious mind, like, so to speak, in neutral, and it's real hard.
That's true. That's
it's
true.
real hard because I don't know if you've ever experienced when you're drifting to sleep and you're in between states and things happen sometimes.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, and if you could control that, that's the trick.
Well, you're using the word control. That's part of it, but also.
It's kind of, well, I know where you're coming from. I understand your
Well, no, not even that so much.
The words control and all that. But as far as projecting energy, it's hard to do that consciously when you're trying to disconnect your conscious mind at the same time to do it and reach that state of equilibrium in between there and here.
Definitely, and I really appreciate your call. Thank you very much. I just want to hit on that. The difference, I think, becomes between will and desire.
Right.
If you have the will to do something, you'll do it. But as soon as that desire to do the thing you're willing, as soon as you let that desire creep in there, it corrupts your will. And your will is the most powerful thing that you have. But desire is very powerful as well, and it can corrupt your will just like that.
Right, and parlor tricks like bending spoons and things like that, you're talking about telekinesis, it is magic as far as moving and manipulating matter by the mind. True, it is. But if it just turns into a parlor trick, then it's not really serving any purpose, really, than just to show and tell. Let's go ahead and grab another call quickly. Line 3, you're on the air.
Yes, I'd like to find out what's the difference between what you're talking about and witchcraft. In the Bible, witchcraft and magic come from the same root word. And I'm just wondering, is that what you're endorsing? And what God are you talking about when you use the term God? Are you talking about the Judeo-Christian God, or are you talking about the other force on the other side, which is Satan?
I'll let you start on that one. Thanks for your call. I appreciate it.
Well, if you want to take it to the level of Jehovah or what have you, that is not the end-all, be-all God. We're talking about past the form. There is God that's beyond form. Once God is manifests down and trickles down, if you will, into form, then you have a Jehovah, or you have a Krishna, or you have, you have Brahma, or you have one of these great deities that people worship. But in actuality, that is a lesser aspect of the unmanifest, of the unknowable, of the ineffable, of the real aspect of God.
Yeah. The highest aspect of God has no opposite. There is no duality in the plane where God exists. So there is no devil. There, like I mentioned on my other show, there's no opposing force for God. God created that force to give us perspective.
Contrast. There has to be contrast.
Exactly.
God made all that is bad and all that is good. And then we have to have something to play off one another for us to gain and grow and understand and learn our lessons. If it was all good and plum fairy tales and sugar plums or whatever, we would never really be able to learn any lessons. And myself personally, I would like to add one thing, that I feel like that the par excellence, the best way, the most perfect way, was exemplified by Jesus through Christ in the gospel narratives. And that is how I try to emulate and fashion my own personal life after, is that individual, that I feel like that was the best way we have to follow magic, if you will, and that Jesus was a magician for all intents and purposes, whether you choose to look at it that way or not. It's just really boils down to interpretation. If you want to look at the Bible strictly literally, that's fine, but there's a lot of symbolism in there, and if you really do comparative religion studies, you'll see that the same symbolism is in all the great religions. The same symbolism. 3 days in a cave, born to a virgin mother. All these things you find over and over again. And I'm going to do a multi-part series on the early writings of the church fathers coming up, and I want to get into some of that a bit. We don't have much time left. I'm going to have to wrap up here quickly. But Jeff, thanks again for coming on. I think we have covered a lot of ground. Sorry,
yeah, we
callers.
have. And you know what? We only got through half of your outline, if that.
Let's try to do this again maybe another time.
Hey, anytime you like.
Because there's a lot more that we can discuss, and hopefully we can help people out a bit more with understanding more so.
I appreciate you having me here. And for those of you who might be watching, I'll have my show on Tuesday night at 10 o'clock. And the topic next Tuesday will be reincarnation.
Good. Cool. Thanks, Austin. Have a nice evening.
Take care.